back on the way to a Harley dealership. This time, I'm not going to be the guy trading in a sport bike, but the guy in front might very well be that dude. And in the spirit of today's adventure, I have a topic I'd like to discuss, and that involves buying bikes from dealerships. Do you guys think that there is like a false sense of security when you buy a bike from a dealership? And I'm not talking new bikes. New bikes should be checked out, and like Harley has this policy where their salesman will ride a new bike and at least put a few miles on it just to make sure that everything's squared away. But I'm talking like used bikes. So for example, let me get into what happened with me on this MT-09. I want to lead that off by saying the MT-09 is not a bad bike. There were some things that were not 100%, we'll say. It had about an eighth of a turn slack in the throttle, which I've come to learn through other experiences that people have had with this dealership. I guess their mechanic likes a little extra slop in their throttle. I don't. I would rather it be ready to go whenever I decide to flip the wick. But that was a little out of sorts. The clutch lever needed adjusted like horribly bad. I ended up adjusting that on the ride home so that it didn't have a huge freaking dead spot in it. Once I got back from the hour-and-a-half ride back to my shop, by that point I knew that the suspension was off somehow. I knew that the levers needed adjusted and a couple other things needed tweaked. It had some weird noises that I couldn't quite track down. And getting into this is where some of the hit and miss with buying used from a dealership comes from. You might get that false sense of security that you're buying a used bike from a dealership, so they've probably gone through it, checked everything out, and made sure everything's gravy. A lot of dealerships don't. And this bike, I feel like they might have gave it a once-over, but they definitely didn't go in and like thoroughly inspect what all the noises were. So this one already had a little bit of cam chain rattle. It also has the notorious MT-09 clutch basket rattle, where the little bushings in there get compressed over time, the oil breaks them down, makes them hard, whatever. And the clutch basket starts rattling a little bit. I can deal with that, it's whatever. And MT-09s have a track record of sounding like a 3-cylinder Perkins diesel, which this one does. I love it to death, but it does sound like a diesel when it's idling. But I notice weird pops and crackles that just really shouldn't be there. So I start going into the bike because I want to see what all's been done to it. It's obvious that it's not stock, right? So I go to pull the airbox off, stock air filter, the snorkel is still there, which a lot of people that modify MT-09s or have them tuned will chop the snorkel inside the airbox. So I start digging into the bike, and of course it has some exhaust noise that I want to track down. After a little bit of research, I did find where some people had reported having problems with rattling noises coming from the Akrapovich carbon fiber exhaust can, and some people attributed it to being a piece of carbon fiber loose inside the can from where they drilled or popped a rivet through there. Some people have found a loose rivet head. I pulled mine off and it had like an obvious death rattle in it. It was crazy. And it ended up being the screw that holds in the decibel killer. So I'm just going to assume someone pulled it out at some point, dropped the screw in the can, and then put it all back together. I don't know. There's a couple of oddities that I just really don't understand. While I'm there, I decide, you know what? The tubing is really thin on this exhaust system, so that's probably contributing to some of the noise that I'm hearing. So I get the wise idea that I may wrap this head pipe and try and dampen it down by adding some wrap to it. I go to pull the exhaust off, and every single nut holding that head pipe on is like finger tight. I literally broke one loose with one finger on the ratchet, not torqued down at all. Which granted, they don't torque down tight. I will give credit to that. They only torque down to like 14 to 16 foot-pounds. It's not very tight at all. But these nuts were nowhere close to that. They might have been torqued down to like 14 to 16 inch-pounds. They were hand tight, if anything. They were so loose, in fact, that part of my pinging that I was hearing was actually exhaust leaks. The exhaust was blowing past every gasket and had actually sooted up both sides of every gasket, and you could see where the exhaust gaskets had not even been compressed enough to seal off to begin with. Reassembled, torqued down to the proper spec, and went for a couple of rides. And it took a few rides of riding it a little bit, coming back and torquing down the nuts, just checking them, and I would have one or two that got a little extra torque on them. But eventually I got that problem solved, and the exhaust leak sound finally went away. And in the end, it's all back together. It runs fine. It has the standard MT-09 rattles and clacks of a CP3 engine that's been broken in a little bit. It has the old clutch basket rattle. It's got the ping of the Akrapovic exhaust. But otherwise, it's a very strong machine. And mechanically, I feel like it's sound and will be for quite a long time. So, this is not a I got screwed by a dealership story. This is more of a don't always expect things to be perfect when you buy a bike from a dealership story. But that's all I got for this one, guys. Question goes out to you. Have you ever bought a used motorcycle from a dealership to find out that someone has haphazardly assembled this thing for trade-in value or whatever it may be? Drop your comments down below. Curious to see your thoughts and your experiences. But as always, guys, stay safe, stay sane, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.